Well, maybe we can start.
Yeah.
Just the presentation. Well, nice to have you all here. And we will have today a session with João Loureiro and Silvia Castro, the importance of pollinators in agroecosystems. Okay, so I will leave the presentation of the topic for the speakers. For sure, they will know more about it than me. But I would like to present a little bit tagg, the organization. So tagg is an NGO that are focused on many topics, mainly related to the SDG challenges. And in the last years, we had some very interesting sessions and presentations, webinars that are really about change the life of the young people that watch our sessions. We want to impact lives and to make create opportunities to deliver free education. I think it's important to have these opportunities nowadays, and since the internet now is for sure more accessible, it can be a strong and powerful way to impact these lives. So I would like to present you. Okay, so we have today João Loureiro is associate professor at the Department of Life Sciences at the University of Coimbra, and also a researcher at the Flower Lab of the Center of Functional Ecology, Associate Laboratory Terra, also in the University of Coimbra. We also have Silvia Castro, that is an assistant researcher at the Flower Lab of the Center of Functional Ecology 2, Associate Laboratory Terra of University of Coimbra. So it's very nice to have you. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And I think the main purpose of our guests is to hear you and hear about your topic. So I will give you space now to start the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. I think while Silvia is putting the presentation on, I think it's time for us to thank you for the invitation to be here, to thank also for you in particular, who was the person who invited us, but also to tagng and to Joshua, to whom we were speaking just a few minutes before. It's a great opportunity for us to show the work that we are doing and also pollinators in agroecosystems. So thank you once again for this opportunity. Let's see how it goes, because we'll try to have like a dynamic presentation where both myself and Silvia will speak along this presentation. We'll try to engage people with some interactions in between. So I hope that I see some Portuguese people, at least from the names, that they seem like Portuguese people in the audience. Some people also from abroad. So in any moment, I think also that people want to intervene. I think they are be free to do so. So I think the idea is to put it not as a monologue between ourselves, but to have it so people engaged during the presentation. So yeah, I think I can start, Silvia. Yeah, the topic that brings us is some of the research areas that we have in the Flower Lab. And one of the main areas of our research is related with pollination and pollinator diversity. So I think to start, it is important to explain to you what is pollination and how important it is. It may seem quite a basic process that occurs in nature, which is basically the transfer of pollen from the anthers to the stigma of a flower, even from the same individual, from different individuals. But it involves the interaction between the plant and the pollinator. And the plant, with this interaction, wants to complete its life cycle and to produce fruits and seeds, and to guarantee that its next generation is viable and can continue. And of course, the pollinator visits the flowers to obtain some kind of reward. And in many or in most cases, it interacts with the flower to obtain food. So usually it is considered and well considered a mutualistic interaction, but if we see closely, it is based on selfish motives, because the pollinator only visits, as I told before, the flower because he wants to get some kind of reward. And the plant has to be attractive to pollinator because in comparison with other organisms that may seek for to make some kind of interaction to complete and to reproduce, the plants are immobile, so they cannot move and look for partners to reproduce. So they rely on the pollinators for such purpose. So I think that we have like a first question already for you. And for those that are in the Zoom session, and for those I think are also on the Facebook live event, we have a quiz. We have some questions during the presentation. The first one that we have for you is, do all flowering species, flowering plant produce fruits? So the challenge that we have for you, if you connect to menti.com and you enter this code, you will be able to give us your opinion. Do you think that all flowering plants produce fruits and seeds? Let's see.
Yes. So think about all the flowering plants that you have around you. And yeah, think if you ever saw the fruits or the seeds of that plant. You can think on crop plants, on wild plants, plants in your balcony or in your garden.
Yeah, so...
Okay. Do I need to click in something, João?
I think the results, you should click on that one. So the results should, if you start to, I will also try to, should start to appear directly in here.
Yeah, I replied, so we have one answer at least.
At least, yeah. So Andrea replied.
Yeah,
it should work. I'm not
so we
sure
should have.
If it's something I'm doing, but I'm not seeing anything to click through.
Yeah. Supposedly the result should appear there. Let me see if I can also go to menti.com. Okay.
So the first technical problem.
Yeah. 7, 6, 9, 8.
I can advance on this, for example, and then we see the problem on the next question.
Yeah.
If you'd like. So if you
think it would be interesting to see
the results, right?
Yeah. So if you, can I suggest something, Silvia? If you just remove the laser option from your pointer.
Okay.
And to see.
Okay. Okay, so very nice. We have most of the answers. Yes, it's yes. All the flowering plants produce fruits. And indeed, if you, think about all the plants that are around us, they are like all other living organisms, and the main purpose is to produce offspring, to leave their genes to the next generation, right? So if one thinks on that, plants are not different from other living organisms. So they leave their genes through their offspring, which in this case are seeds and fruits. So even if you are talking about crops such as kiwi fruits or peach or apples, wherever, you can immediately see and the fruits that they produce. But the same occurs in the wild plants. So even if it's like small violets or dandelions or some endangered species that are only in specific places of the world, very narrow areas, they all produce fruits, as you can see here, okay? So in normal conditions, yes, all flowering plants produce fruits. So that's good, right? Now I think the next question is, who pollinates these plants? Because they are rooted. who is responsible to move their pollen grains between flowers? So what are your
basically,
thoughts?
who are the pollinators? So what
Who
are
are
your
the
thoughts?
pollinators?
So if you go again to the same web page, it's the same code. So you should also already see the possibility to answer our next question. So in this one, you should write at least some that you think might be involved in this process. So let's see if it's more quick than from before in terms of seeing the result in the screen.
So I think you can vote multiple times as well, because you might have not only one pollinator, so you can enter multiple options. Okay. Who is moving around the flowers? Okay. Okay, we don't have answers yet. I don't know. Yes, we have. André is saying. Okay. We are seeing it. Okay, so we have birds, bees. The biggest words mean that they have bigger, more votes on it. We have insects mostly. Wind can also be a factor. That's very good. Mammals, reptiles, flies, butterflies, wind again, fly, bats, which is very nice. Okay, so let's see.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you nailed it somehow. So I think you identified insects mostly as one of the main groups responsible for transporting the pollen grains from one flower to the other. But you also identified the birds, which are not so common to act as pollinators in the Mediterranean ecosystems, in temperate climate, but it can be found in other regions of the world as very good pollinators. You have bats. I think someone also mentioned that. You have small rodents. You have reptiles, mostly related with island pollination. Within insects, we'll see who are the main groups. Just very, very recently, we had the first clue of an amphibianous, a frog that was proven to be acting as a pollinator of a tropical and Amazon tree species. But if you look on the right side of the screen, and you also identify them as important, there are several plant species who rely on the wind. And I think none of you have said that, but there are a few species who rely on water, mostly aquatic plants. But actually, if we classify in general, like the biotic vectors, that transport pollen grains that are based on animals, they correspond to more or less 80% of the plant species that we know about. And only on 20% of the plants, they rely on abiotic vectors like the wind and water. Okay.
Mostly wind.
Yeah, but mostly wind from these 20%. So when we look at temperate climates, actually the main groups are insects, and within insects, the ones that are more efficient on transporting pollen between the reproductive structures, we can find the bees, the overflies, and the butterflies. There are some, we have here butterflies. The role of butterflies, diurnal butterflies, is widely recognized as very important, but we start to get much more evidence that nocturnal butterflies, moths, can also play a very important role in some plant groups. But when we talk about bees, and we had like an answer from that perhaps we immediately think about the honeybee. And despite the honeybee, it's quite important. It has an economic value. It can be economically explored. If we look at it, it's only one species. And despite that, we are speaking to the international audience. We'll, in this particular part, and we want you to try to figure out if you have an idea how many bee species do we have in Portugal, please look at the size of the country. Despite we just in a small clue, a small hint for you, we are on a biodiversity hotspot, so it's kind of small hint. But we are asking you if you can tell us what you think might be the number of bee species that have already been identified in Portugal. So this is the next challenge.
How many? 1, 10, 20, how many species do we have just in Portugal? Just think about Portugal.
Yeah, the size of Portugal is not big in comparison, at least with Tunisia, with Nigeria. But yeah, we have some Portuguese here, so it would be interesting for them.
Okay, we have some value. We have around, yeah. So you have different numbers in between. You can see the numbers, yeah. But then the mean value will go for 382. Although we have someone telling that we have much more. And indeed, let us think about diversity of bees.
Yes, so if we look at the bee diversity that we have bees that can have very different sizes, morphology, can be very different from what you are used to see as the honeybee. And actually, the latest checklists that we have for Portugal, which are quite recent, have identified at least already 734 bee species that we have in Portugal. So much more. The wild pollinators, wild bee species are much more than only the honeybee that we perhaps most people recognize as one of the bee species that we have in our country.
And this is usually a big difficulty when we want to disseminate the importance of pollinators, is that the general public thinks of honeybee instead of thinking on these more than 700 species that we have. So,
So sorry, Silvia. We already talked to you about the importance for plants, about pollination and pollinators. So the next question is it really important for them? So their dependence on pollinators, this value changes between wild plants and crops. So what we want for you to answer now is to figure out what is the percentage of dependence. Okay.
The percentage of plants, wild plants and crops that rely on pollinators to produce fruits. How many wild plants in percentage depend on them, and how many crops depend on them?
Yeah, the results should appear.
Yes. Yeah. No. Okay.
Yeah. It takes a while. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a while to communicate. So we have guessing wild plants around 79%, and we are thinking about values for the entire globe, for the entire world, and 75% of crops. And actually, you have not been far away from the reality.
For example, for crops, the 75%, you nailed it once again, but it's curious. If you see the distribution of votes, you have like an average of 75%, but some of you said it was more, some of
even
them higher, and then some of them lower. So yeah, it was funny.
And for the wild plants at the world level, we actually have at least 90% of the plants with the total or some level of dependence on pollinators to produce fruits. So it's a big number. Of course, this number is bigger in tropical areas and slightly lower in temperate areas, but still the dependence is quite high. And the important thing, thinking on crop production, which is very important for sustain human populations. Actually, the studies say that not only the amount of pollinators available in a given orchard or in a given crop area, field, not only the number, but also the diversity of pollinators is tightly connected with production. Not only by increasing, smaller numbers and lower diversity is associated with lower production, while higher abundances and higher diversity of pollinators is associated with higher production of bigger quality products that are more rich in nutrients, in flavors, in that can last longer, have a longer shelf life, etc. Right? So bigger quality, and this is actually obtained regardless of the abundance of honeybees, meaning that the presence of wild bees is always very important to maintain the production numbers, okay? So regardless of honeybee abundance, the wild pollinators are always contributing to this increased crop production. Of course, unfortunately, because of human activities, we face, in our days, we face a biodiversity loss through the entire world. And this is due to many stressors, including, mainly including habitat loss and its fragmentation, the simplification of a landscape, the use of agrochemicals and pollutants, the impacts of biological invasions that displace the native vegetation or native populations, and also climate change, which change distribution of species, lead to mismatches between flowering plants and its pollinators, etc. And this is leading to a huge decrease in diversity in general, biodiversity in general, and pollinators are not an exception. And here we speak about the example of habitat fragmentation, but the other factors also have similar results. And as the habitat gets more fragmented, we decrease the diversity and the amount of and the abundance of pollinators. This is mainly because the pollinators have more and more difficulties to travel through the landscape because they have to move and they have difficulties reaching the next area with the resources needed for their subsistence. So let's imagine, and because of this, we have 1 in 3 species of bees and butterflies under severe decline in Europe, and 1 in 10 species of butterflies and species in risk of extinction also in Europe. So this is very concerning. So let's imagine the impact of habitat fragmentation. So the habitat fragmentation immediately leads to decrease of flowering resources. So because we destroy the habitat, immediately we have less flowering plants available, right? This is like immediate result. Because of that, that area will be less attractive for pollinators. So pollinators will tend to go to other places, some of them, right? Because of reduction in pollinators in that place, also plants in the next generation, they will produce less seeds, so they will be less abundant in the next generations. So they will also diminish through time. This decreases again the attractiveness and the amount of resources to sustain pollinator populations, and pollinators will decrease as well. And this is like a loop that feeds itself in a negative way. So as we have less plants, we have less resources for pollinators. They have to find other areas, so they reduce in this area. Less seeds, less plants in the next generation, less pollinators. And this is leading to change in the community in a cascade effect of negative effects, sorry. And we know this from other studies, from countries where they have temporal series that enable us to compare current diversity and abundances of pollinators versus old, so past data on these same communities. And we know that some pollinators are really declining severely, others are not maintaining, and some are actually increasing because they benefit somehow of these changes. And you can see, for example, in these graphics that, for example, for bees, and this is very easy to read, although it seems difficult, but red colors, so hot colors, mean decrease in certain in certain groups, and blue colors mean increase. So you can see, for example, for bees that we have mostly red colors, so bees are declining, both in UK and Netherlands, while syrphids, for example, actually are benefiting from some of the changes that we are doing to the landscape. But the problem with this is that we are facing species extinction and changes in pollinator compositions that also impact the success of pollination of both wild plants and crops. Okay? And maybe we jump this quiz, João, because we can, I don't know if you'd like to make it.
Yeah, I think we can if we do it quickly. So the idea is that if you try to guess what is the scenario in Portugal or in the Iberian Peninsula in general about the situation, current situation of pollinators, if they
What
are
do you think is
increasing,
happening?
decreasing, if we have the same scenario as the ones that Silvia showed you in the UK and Netherlands. What do you think?
What do you think? To see if, okay, similar scenario, better scenario. Only two answers. Well, actually, João, I don't know. Actually,
yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
No idea. So that's, I think, one of the things that we ask this question is that people in most cases may say worst case scenario or worst scenario or better scenario. But actually for our territory, we have no idea.
No data. We have no data for our territory. And this is actually transversal to many territories in the globe. We have, so most likely we are facing similar scenarios. This is the most expected outcome because the threats that are menacing the UK, the Netherlands, other places in Europe are similar to the ones that we are facing here. So most likely we will either be similar or going towards that direction. But actually we don't have numbers because we don't have a temporal series from the past that enables now to reassess them and see what is happening to our communities. And this is very difficult for us to go to the politicians and try to arrange or negotiate conservation measurements, implement actions, because actually we don't have numbers that confirm what is happening here. So we need to change this actually.
And there are ways to monitor. I think Andre just asked that on the chat. We'll talk a little bit about that in a while. Okay, and things are getting in a way that hopefully there will be some monitoring schemes regarding pollinators in Portugal in a short period of time.
Please go ahead.
No. So we will show you two case studies that we have developed in Flower Lab. The first one is the impact of land use, land change in agroecosystems, in particular regarding the kiwi production area in Portugal. We have done this in the scope of of kiwi project. So the idea here is to develop strategies that would increase the sustainability of kiwi production in Portugal. In this study, we basically had 22 orchards where we evaluated pollinator diversity. These orchards were distributed mostly from the production area in Portugal. And we classified the orchards according to the in-field practices and the surrounding landscape. And when looking at the in-field practices, we have classified these orchards as insect-friendly or unfriendly according with the practices like if the orchard was involved by some kind of nets, if they use pesticides or herbicides, if they had installation of honeybee hives. So then we classified these 22 orchards as more insect-friendly or insect unfriendly orchards, and we tried to see how it was the abundance and diversity of pollinators in these two types of classification in terms of orchards, of kiwi orchards. And we looked at diversity of wild pollinators or pollinators in general. We could see that kiwi orchards where the practices were more friendly for insects. We clearly see a higher diversity of wild pollinators. We also see a higher abundance. And when we looked at the honeybee in particular, it is the left bars that you see on your right, we saw no significant difference, but actually a small decrease in orchards where practices were more friendly for insects. And it is mainly because the honeybee is like a ubiquitous species already in Portugal, and it's the factors that control its distribution and its abundance are not so related with the practices, in-field practices that we have. So then we were also interested in looking at the landscape surrounding the kiwi orchards. So in a radius of 2 kilometers, we classified the surrounding area as urban, agriculture, forest, or herbaceous. And then we classified the 22 orchards as being mostly surrounded by forest and herbaceous. If it was a mixture between this and basically agricultural areas surrounding the kiwi orchard, to try to see if the surrounding environment would impact the abundance and diversity of pollinators. It was very interesting to notice that the diversity of wild pollinators were mostly correlated with a forest and herbaceous environment, and this was significantly different from the mixture with an agriculturally based environment. The same trend was observed for the abundance of pollinators, wild pollinators. And again, the honeybee abundance was a correlation with the opposite trend from those that was observed in the wild pollinators, again, for the same factors that I have pointed you before. So this is a case study that we have, and that lead us to something that for us is very important, and that Silvia already talked a little bit about before, is that we should start to think on landscapes that actually work for both biodiversity and for us humans. And the best case scenarios is a mixture between natural and semi-natural areas surrounded or with some kind of forest and spontaneous and cultivated forest in surroundings, and our agricultural areas are mixed somehow with all of this. And of course, we should have also it's important to have also urban areas where people that work on this territory can also live. So the second case study, I will leave the word to Silvia.
So yes, so actually João was talking about two dimensions of our actions. Or when we have a farm, we can act locally, and we can control everything because it's our farm or it's the area that we manage. Even if it's not ours, it's our responsibility. But it's impacted by what we do inside and by what is around it. What is around it has a diversity that spills over towards our area, and we benefit or not from that surroundings, okay? And the idea
what
here...
Silvia is saying is that sometimes you may have very good sustainability practices on your farm, but if the surrounding environment does not comply with the same measures, the effect that you may have on your farm can be very low. You know, you should think on the territory to be as multifunctional as possible.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And the idea in this study that I will show you is not to present you numbers, it's just to show you how dynamic the system is. And in this project, Cultivar, we studied pollination services in agroecosystems in the interior part of Portugal. And we focused on cherry orchards in this particular case. It's the PhD thesis of Catarina Siopa, which is here in the photo. The previous results were actually results from the master thesis of Hugo. And to show you how dynamic this can be, we will show you results from a farm that is Quinta da Porta, is a sherry farm, where it is surrounded by different kinds of land uses, right? So we have a huge diversity of land usages around. And as examples, you can see that we have the cherry orchard, which really strictly depend on pollinators to produce. We have olive groves, vineyards, pastures, permanent pastures, annual pastures, invaded stands. We have open shrublands, actually different kinds of shrublands, pine forests, borders, hedgerows, semi-natural habitats, etc. Right? So what he did is that we identified these different types of soil usage in surroundings of the orchard, and we wanted to show to the producer where the pollinators were through time and space. Where were the pollinators through the entire year? Which patches are really crucial to maintain the pollinators that then make a service, the pollination service to his orchard? Okay.
But
So
Silvia, if I might just interrupt, because if you focus on the cherry orchards, it's flowering for 2-3 weeks maximum. So it depends of pollinators for this short period of time, but pollinators should have
need to feed
during the whole life cycle, during the whole year. So it's only feeding on cherry flowers. It's not enough.
It's not enough because cherry flowers are flowering through a short period, or any crop is flowering only for a short period of time, but also because many pollinators need a diversified diet. Some more than others because they have different diet rates, but many of them need a diversified diet, so they don't feed only in one species, okay, to be healthy. So we sampled these 12 types, these 12 typologies of land use, land cover, and through an entire year. So we started in February 2021 and we end in January 2022. Once a month, we went to all the typologies and sampled pollinators and their interactions. We made a huge collection of 1,600 insects. From these, we had 350 species of pollinators, from which 235 bees. And for you to have an idea on our knowledge about bees in Portugal, actually, from these observations, we had 177 new regional records of species that were never recorded in the region. For you to understand that even in Europe, there are areas that we don't know which pollinators exist there. Okay, we had a national new record and we have a new record for science. Just screening an orchard and its surroundings, okay?
And just for saying to you that, as Silvia was telling you, is not necessarily because this is a widely diversified region of Portugal.
No.
It might be, but basically it was because we went there and start sampling.
It was never studied before. That's the reason why we have so many new records, okay? It's because it was never studied as many areas of Portugal. And here you have, again, the map where we have the different land use, land cover typologies, okay? And this will be converted in different symbols, but it's for you to understand that each circle that you see here, it's a land cover land use typology, okay? And this will be converted in these squares, which mean the size refers to the number of species and the color, the number of insects, so abundance, the size of the square, and the color refers to diversity or richness, number of species, okay? And we will see what happens through the year. So we have February, and you see that, okay, we already have some insects going around, and then March we have a huge peak with animal pastures having a huge diversity and the abundance. And sorry, now I have the letters in Portuguese, which is confusing me a lot. So this is shrublands. And what we see, and it's not important the typology actually, what you need to see is that through the year, pollinators will move and will depend in some land use land cover types instead of others, okay? And this is important because we need to think on elements that are really crucial to maintain the populations through the entire year. And we don't need only one, we need a diversity of land use land cover types so that we can have diversified and abundant communities of pollinators in our production areas, okay?
So, and Silvia, if I might just add that one of the interesting typologies that was highly visited by pollinators is actually from a crop which is not dependent on pollinators, is the vineyards. And actually, because these vineyards that were in the surroundings of the sherry orchard had a management and a kind of infield practices that were promoting pollinators because they were not mowing the vegetation. So in the lower parts of the vineyards, there were a lot of plants that were very important for the pollinators to survive and to feed on in some months like July, where if you look at the center, we had already no flowering from the sherry orchard.
Yeah. This vineyard is like a traditional one, and actually the vegetation is maintained. Sometimes there is
if there are it's grazing.
It's grazed, but just passing, not that they are stopped there. Some sheep grazing, like moving around, but for a couple of minutes, and it's enough to maintain without depauperating completely the flowering resources. So it's really, really very interesting. And then we reach September, where we have the decline of the season, with most of the organisms being hibernating until the next season, and we have very low activity, okay? So this is for you to understand that we need this diversity because it enables to maintain the communities of pollinators, and features that are very important and work as green corridors connecting natural areas with other kinds of like shrublands, vineyards. It's like the hedgerows are really very important elements connecting, while other areas like semi-natural areas, areas that are like the vineyards that are maintained with a very pollinator-friendly practice are actually working as reservoirs of biodiversity that then goes to the orchard field, okay? And then at the same time, we see declines in diversity when we have interventions like this, like cutting the shrubland completely. This has a huge impact in pollinator community, or cleaning the soil or moving the soil completely and cleaning it completely. This has huge impacts. So just to guide you, what can we do? We can, in our production areas, we can maintain some natural and semi-natural elements that are not used for production because they are in places that are not on handy to sow things or plant things, and we can maintain them as more natural as possible. They will work as reservoirs of functional diversity. We can maintain, implement, or improve green infrastructures, such as hedgerows. So we can do that actively in our productions. Ideally promoting native vegetation. So if we didn't destroy it, actually nature is there, and the plants that are from that region are the best ones to survive, and because they are the most adapted to that areas. Diversity and flowers all around the year, ideally from early spring to late summer. And finally, I'm having problems here seeing. So try to have practices that are pollinator friendly, like knowing when to mow, when to use agrochemicals in a way that minimize the impacts that they will have on insects such as pollinators. It's very, very important. Okay. That said, we would like just to make you a brief international context. I don't know if you still have time.
Yes,
it's okay.
We have time. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I will go on. So we are telling you a little bit what should be done. Yeah. But of course, there are several things that are already being done internationally, not necessarily a long time ago, despite the importance of pollinators and pollination has been considered for decades. But actually, there's been a strong effort since 2017 or 2016. And the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, with the production of an assessment reports on pollinators, pollination, and food production in 2017 was a big landmark to people start and politicians to start to think more deeply on these subjects. And actually it started in a COP15 meeting where the Convention on Biological Diversity established the International Pollinator Initiative, coordinated by FAO, and they developed an action plan for promoting actions for pollinator conservation with some very clear goals until 2030. And more or less in the same time, in the same COP15, an international alliance called Promote Pollinators was created to try to work on the policies and to try to encourage countries to develop national strategies to work to promote pollinators. And more or less in the same time, even the European Commission launched the European Union Pollinator Initiative with several funds allocated for projects in the beginning, mostly focused on honeybee, but also now on wild pollinators with projects starting to look at monitoring schemes. And this fostered some countries to start developing their national strategies. And in Europe, one of the cases that they started a long time before, they are already in the second 5 years period, is the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan that actually started in 2016 with great results acting both from very locally to actions promoted at the national level. More recently, in 2021, if I'm not wrong, Spain also launched its national strategy for the pollinator conservation. And these are just two examples of, there are many more in Europe. In Portugal, and I will try to be brief because we have an international audience in here. We are already told, we have quite high diversity of wild pollinators, of wild plants in Portugal. We have many crops that are that depend on insects for producing fruits. And actually, there are starting to be a lot of initiatives that start work on this subject. We have a red list of invertebrates that is being prepared and should be launched quite soon. We have quite recent checklists, the number of bees that I showed you before, the 700 and more than 720 bees that were already registered in our territories from checklists that the first one was compiled in 2017. There are some recent ones already being launched. We have some kind of biodiversity platforms and barcoding databases that start to be developed for our insects. We have several research and dissemination projects. We have Pollinet that I will talk to you more about in a few minutes. And we hope that all the dissemination activities, that the political awareness and sensitivity for this topic starts to be bigger than years before. So actually, Portugal joined this Promote Pollinators coalition in mid-2020. And the idea was that with this, we could start thinking on a national action plan for pollinator conservation. And we at the Center for Functional Ecology contacted our national authorities, the ICNF, the Conservation Institute for Nature Conservation and Forests, and they were very happy with this contact. And we worked together to create a Pollinet. Is our collaborative network for the evaluation, conservation, and valuing of pollinators and pollination. And since we created Pollinet in 2021, and we were very happy to engage in a quite all volunteer way, people from academia, from public administration, NGOs, producers associations, industry, municipalities, and we actually, Pollinet already comprises 63 institutions, in total 130 individual members. So we are quite happy, and the idea is that people start to work together to a common goal. We are trying also to promote all the activities related with pollinators through our social media, social networks. We have a web page, so if you want to know a little bit more what we do, despite it is written mostly in Portuguese because it's focused on Portuguese territory, you just follow us. We have Facebook, YouTube, and all the other web pages. Okay, so this is the landing page of Pollinet for you, but it's in Portuguese only.
Yes, and with this entrance in the Promote Pollinator Alliance enable us to give very important steps towards pollinator conservation in Portugal. And one of them was the opportunity to participate in a series of workshops based on a theory of change to create a first draft for an action plan for Portugal, which started past year at the beginning of the 2022. And this, together with the advisory of Promote Pollinators and Naturalis Biodiversity Center, actually we built a team of 20 people from very different kinds of institutions. You can see here all the institutions involved. And I wanted to show you the team. And this team worked towards an interesting concept. So we worked together to identify a common dream, a dream for pollinators in Portugal. And based on that dream, we worked in this whiteboard in an interactive way where all the opinions matter to try to identify which kind of actions were needed to achieve that dream. And working from the dream backwards, what do we need immediately before the dream? And to accomplish this, what do we need? Who do we need to involve, etc. And we try to build it with everyone, meaning that we call people from academia, from public administration, producers associations, etc. Municipalities.
Let me say that it was a very interesting process because not all the times we were in complete agreement on the actions that needed to be done. So we had to have a compromise between
and that was fine. And that was fine. The important
that's part
thing
of the
was that
part of the process. Yeah.
The important thing was to be aware that there were people thinking on a different way, and how can we accommodate and reach a consensus between everyone. And this was very interesting. And we don't want you to show you the entire process. Of course, that was an example. We hope to have a document the latest this year. But we identified these 4 main actions. So actions dealing with policy and funding, research and knowledge, awareness and ecoliteracy, practices and management, leading to this dream. Our dream is that pollinators and ecosystem services they provide are promoted across all landscapes in Portugal. Okay? And this is like how without reading it, is how complex it is, with the colors identifying these areas of action and how connected they are. They are actually even more connected than what it's shown in the picture. Now we will translate this in a text so that it comes out.
Silvia, if you just can go back to the slide, because like policy and funding is on the left side, because without some measurements that are defined in terms of policy guidance, or without fundings, we cannot go ahead. So then trying to see how connected things were, it was a very interesting challenge to then, all of them should then connect to our impact statement, our dream.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. This was very important because we were able to present these results on the COP15 in December, which was very important because Portuguese government was represented there, as well as our national conservation agencies, and they were able to talk about it and raise awareness for its importance. And we hope in a very near future to be giving the very first steps on an action plan in Portugal based on all of this work. So this is what we hope for the, I think we will skip this, João.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea here was for you to make the take-home messages, but I think we'll skip it and we'll let them for time for questions afterwards. So just to finish, and it might be quite unusual to have it in the end, but we both, myself and Silvia, belong to the Flower Lab. This is some pictures of some of the team. There are still some members that are not represented here in pictures, but as we were discussing in the beginning, we belong to the Center for Functional Ecology in the University of Coimbra. If those we have our webpage on the top right corner, but we also have tried to have a strong promotion of the activities that we do in social networks. So if you just look for Flower Lab on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, you'll find us easily. So then if you are interested in these topics, just follow our work and we'll be happy to interact with you. Okay.
And the results that we were talking, they are possible just because of this wonderful team. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much.